Mhm.
There you go.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. If I could have a roll call on me, Norm, please.
Trustee Rubin,
Here.
trustee Hallwax. Here. Trustee Mealopoulos.
Here.
Let's see, first thing is public comment. Anyone here that would like to speak? Looking around? No? Okay, thank you very much. Next thing is the consideration of the minutes from our last meeting a month ago. Any comments? If not, could I have a motion to approve, please?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye, motion passes. Which brings us to Nikki.
Right, review and monthly reports. So today we'll be going through the April Treasurer's Report and Community Investment Program updates.
He's coming for you. Yes, like Darth is sitting next to him, doesn't think his computer is Darth Vader's computer.
Jedi mind trick.
I'm not using that.
For the record, the inside joke is it's a reference to the computer, not the person.
That's
Okay.
right, that's right. Very good.
We don't want anyone to take offense.
Well, moving on to the general fund, it's hard to follow up.
Yeah.
So on a property tax basis, we are less than this time last year by $1.6 million, which is just about the amount of property taxes that we received last year that was late from 2022. So we're pretty much on par with where we were last year. We're at 51.2% of budget, which is what we would expect at this point of the year, with the first installment having been received. And the good news is, even though we didn't receive any property taxes in April, we are hearing from the county that the second installment is going to be on time. We did get the initial property tax levy estimate from the county, which is a good sign that they're actually working on the calculation of the bills and they're making progress. So we are still hopeful that we'll start to see those property taxes come in, maybe late August, but definitely in September. On a sales tax basis, this trend is continuing. Sales taxes are less than this time last year, and the monthly budget, we're at about 29.4% of the annual budget, which is a little shy of where we would hope to be right now. This month was down from last year by about 10%. So we are seeing this declining trend. We do have to kind of keep an eye on. We are pulling data from the Department of Revenue to try and determine what exactly is down in terms of categories. They are very behind in reporting their first quarter data that they report out on standard industrial codes, like by classification, is not out yet for the first quarter, even though it's May 14th. So we are still kind of waiting on that information. Hopefully we'll be able to get that by next month. But on the good positive side, places for eating, utility tax, telecom, parking fees, ambulance fees, and vehicle licenses were all higher than last year, and our monthly budget targets. On the expenditure side in the general fund, our expenditures are higher than last year, but they're only about 30.3% of budget, really kind of on target of where we would expect to be at this point in the year. On the water fund, the volumetric revenue is at about 19.2% of budgets, 38,000 higher than last year. Not something to be alarmed about since it's so early in the season. The fixed charge revenue is right on target of where we would hope to be, obviously higher than last year. Both of those are likely higher at this point just because of the rate increases that we have phased in, not necessarily due to usage quite yet. On the expenditure side, we're running a little bit lighter than last year at 21.5% of budget. This is really just timing. I would expect this to pick up with the upcoming water main replacement. That's going to be coming before the board in June for that project. And then the 16-inch water main valve replacement that was just approved will start, and we'll start to see expenditures related to that as well. I will turn it over to Stella for a moment.
April was a great month. We had 1,000 rounds over budget and almost doubled our revenue budget. We exceeded by 94%. We have been meeting with Friends of the Glencoe Golf Club Subcommittee that is made up of about 15 ladies that live in Glencoe that have school-age children, and they're super excited for the new clubhouse and have been planning a way on the hold their horses for the new events, but for this year, they have several things planned that are new. One of the more interesting ones is a goodbye to the old clubhouse demolition kind of party with music, and they want kids to be able to paint on the walls and do all that kind of fun stuff before we say goodbye. A stargazing event is planned, our Bible Blitz event. We're gonna celebrate National Croquet Day this year. And we just had our bird walk on Monday. It was yesterday, seems like a long time ago. So we had a group of people out there looking at all the migrating birds, and 30 different species were identified. The importance of the golf club to the community was mentioned throughout the whole presentation. So a clubhouse update, we're moving along very well. We have entered and just signed off on our task order 2 and our task order 3. The designs are going very well. Tomorrow, we're meeting with a couple of our ladies that were on the ad hoc design committee to review the interior designs. This is their second meeting that they're participating in to help us finalize the interiors of the clubhouse, and it's looking great. So that's the update. Everybody in the community is super excited about the new clubhouse. Golfers and non-golfers alike. We can be moving forward.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Moving on to the remaining funds, the debt service, MFT and capital project funds are all where we would expect this time as early in the year. We will start to see the MFT and the capital projects fund pick up with the summer months. There are several items on the agenda, including the speed signs. On Thursday night, we'll see those come out of the MFT fund. One other thing that you'll see on Thursday night's agenda is the first installment of debt service payments. This is for interest only, so we pay, just as a refresher, we pay our debt in 2 installments in June and December. June is interest only by design because we wait for all the property tax receipts to come in before we make the large principal payments at the end of the year. So we'll see those in December. So you'll see a payment out of the debt service fund of about $355,000. Moving on to personnel, we are running just shy of about $500,000 higher than last year. What's really driving the difference year over year is the filled vacancies. Our pension contributions have kind of leveled out from a year over year comparison. We're about 34% of the year-to-date budget, which is still in line with what we would expect budgetarily. So we'll continue to monitor this. This is through April. So we'll continue to monitor this for any wild swings, but as of right now, we are generally where we expect to be. Moving on to financial projections. On an annual basis, looking at only revenue, our general fund is projected to have a surplus of $462,000. We did receive that $700,000 for the crib wall project. When we back that out, we're running a little shy of what we are projecting for revenue projections by about $238,000. Sales tax is a big driver there. We did have a not great month, as you remember from last month's finance committee, where we missed some budgetary targets in March. So that's all kind of leading to a projection of kind of missing our revenue budget target. But I would say we're only within the first quarter of the year. We still have some time to make that up. On the water fund side, water fund revenues are coming in strong. We're projecting to exceed our budgetary target by $235,000. When we add expenditures into the equation, the general fund is projecting a deficit of $2.3 million. This is actually better than what we expected. We are budgeting for a drawdown of $3.1 million. When we back out that grant funding, it's about $3 million. I think that should be more, but
And the grant funding came from where again?
That was for the crib wall project that we did together with the park district down at the
State
water
money.
plant.
It was $700,000 from
That
the
was the
state.
federal thing from.
We had applied,
That was-
we had applied for federal grant funding for that project, and Congressman Schneider passed the application down to the state. And so the state was able to provide some resources for it. Yeah, thank you.
We did also put, I think, in the Friday report that we received notice of award for additional funding. That was 300,000 applied to stormwater project from 2022.
Yeah,
We've
it takes
been trying
years.
to get that money since 2022. So it is a good sign.
I think it was actually allocated the year prior to that, and we were
Oh,
never
goodness.
told. We were doing a search of state grant recipients and found the $300,000, and then had to do all of this work to figure out how to actually get the cash. So that was through Senator Fine's office. And it goes back to, I think the application was made in early 2021, so.
Our former
Will
public
help
works
plug the
director.
revenue.
Yes. So they're on our regular rotation of emails to see the status of that grant. So that will certainly help our fund balance. On the water fund side, we are trending well with revenue projections up. Projecting we'll need to draw down fund balance by 1.4 million. Again, it's still a little bit early, so we'll see what the water bids come in at next month. And what that does to that prediction. But we were planning on drawing down 2 million there. The other piece of that too is that we were planning for a different water main project this year, and we're kind of flip-flopping years, so that kind of changes the projection a little bit. From a fund reserve standpoint, we're still strong in the general fund at 72% of operating expenses. At the water fund, obviously, we're at 111, but that's the majority of that is bond proceeds that we've been aggregating for capital. CPI has not been released yet. That'll be coming out tomorrow. But our commodities are still running higher than last year, about 32.6% of budget. Contractual services are the same story at 22.5% of budget. So still not out of line of where we would expect to be this year, but they are running noticeably higher than what we had last year. So continuing on the topic of cash management and projections, we had a meeting earlier today with PMA Financial. You remember that they came to the Finance Committee meeting, I think 2 months ago. And we had an update about something that we haven't talked about since I've been here in the last 6 years, but in the new interest rate environment that we're in, we are now talking about arbitrage. We have been fortunate in the past few years that we have been able to borrow, in some cases, sub 2%. And we are, as our investment advisors keep reminding me, we're in a good position because we are earning much more than what we are paying on the bonds. There are exceptions to this issue, I guess. So I guess if I can just back up for a minute, talk about arbitrage. So for anyone that's not familiar, the Internal Revenue Service has very strict regulations when you borrow using tax exempt money. If you are a government issuer and you issue bonds and you earn interest at a higher rate than what you're paying, the IRS sees that as a windfall at the taxpayer's expense because there's not any taxes being paid on that transaction. So if you issue bonds that are tax exempt under a tax exemption and you spend down within very specific guidelines, and they're on the screen there, you spend down 10% of the balance of bonds within the first 6 months, 45% within a year, 75% within 18 months, and 100% in 2 years, you are allowed to keep that windfall of that excess interest. If you miss any of these targets, you have to pay taxes on that windfall. We work with PMA Financial, who monitors this for us. We have a separate account for each bond issue. And our conversation today was that our current trends on all 3 of our outstanding issues the original 2021 issue, the golf bond issue in 23, and then our water alternate bonds in 23 are all trending towards an arbitrage situation. The dollar amount could change, but what we are looking at for each issue is a range between 52,000 and 89,000 in taxes that we would have to pay on the bond. That is a large dollar amount, but I will say that those dollars are essentially returning the interest income that we have earned on those bond proceeds. So it wouldn't be that we would get less than what we issued, but we can't keep the entire windfall. So that is something that we're monitoring on a staff level, and we'll set those funds aside. You do have to have a true up, a full accounting of where all the bond issues fall within 5 years of issuing, and then file a tax return with the IRS to pay money or not, if we had met these targets. So I did want to just bring that up to the finance committee because we haven't talked about that at all. Because quite honestly, we just haven't been in that interest rate environment where we've had this issue. But we will bring back the full accounting.
Is there anything you can do to somehow comply?
We would have to spend the money. We would have to spend the money in those targets. And because of where we are at with the golf club project, because that project did not take off as fast as we thought it would, we've already missed the targets for spending.
For the one. We were one of them. We have two others.
We have the 2021 bonds, those also did not miss the make the target. 10% in 6 months is hard, especially when the 2021 bonds was 7 million. So we would have had to spend quite a bit right off the bat. And typically when we issue the bonds, we issue them ahead of time so that we have the money when we need it. And it hasn't been an issue in the past because we just haven't been earning this type of interest in past years.
Yeah.
So is our net earn? What is our net?
What's the tax
What's the
rate?
next, what the,
What's the net out?
plus?
The net out, I don't have it handy, but
What rate are they taxes?
we can do a full accounting. I just want, and I should say, we just have estimates right now. So once everything shakes out, we'll have to do a full analysis of the timing of each expenditure and how fast we drew the bonds down. It's not, I shouldn't say, there's not a percentage it's not a neat calculation. It's ugly. So we are going to be working with consultants to do each one of these arbitrage calculations as well as our bond attorney, because it's not very straightforward.
Is the arbitrage, is the tax 100% of all interest, or is it a tax on interest above a set number that floats based on the spread over the bond, or what is it?
The excess is a tax that you miss the target by. So in 6 months, say we spent 5% of the bond proceeds, you have to pay tax on what you earned in interest in that 5% of the bonds. That you didn't
Okay, so if you
spend.
paid no money out on the bond, just had all the proceeds, and weren't able to put out any of the money because of whatever reason, you would pay all of the interest that you earned on 10% of the bond.
Correct.
Is that right? It's 100%.
I believe.
Or do you pay
Uh,
tax, or do you pay tax? on that?
You pay tax on that.
So
That's what I'm asking. Do you pay tax at a set rate, or is it you give them all of the interest on 10% of the bond? Is it 100% tax rate?
I don't think it's 100%.
Okay.
It's a percentage, but
It's,
That's
that's
George's
gonna be,
question.
I don't think this is,
It's not negative. I'm just
It's
curious.
not negative.
It never goes
I know.
negative.
that was the
When the
question.
interest
It's-
rate.
it's not,
I'm a layperson.
so a couple of things.
We're gonna-
Couple things.
Net plus money.
it should be
we're
the
not spending.
differential
Yeah.
between what you're paying on the bonds and what you earned.
Yeah.
So if you are paying 2% and we're earning 5,
Okay,
it's a 3%.
so they take the extra. It's
No,
100% the
no,
extra.
They don't take it, it's
That's-
tax, the extra is taxable,
Yes.
but then we
That's-
don't know what the tax.
And
rate
that's
is.
kind of
I
the
think she's saying
sloppy
it is
part.
100%.
That's kind of the sloppy part of the calculation, because it's,
Just take the whole thing.
so time out.
Sorry.
We're not prepared to have this conversation
I'm
yet.
sorry for.
We are advising you of very brand new information that Nikki just got this morning.
Got it.
And we have never been in an arbitrage situation in the last 40 years. I would venture a guess
Because you've
that,
never seen rates.
because rates have
Yeah.
not been this
Yeah.
high in a very long time, not since the 1980s. So we will be back to you with more information
Okay.
as we get it. As Nikki said, we're sitting down with the financial advisors. We're going to talk to bond counsel. I'm sure they're also kind of feeling their way through this a little bit. It's a unique situation. And we're not the only ones in this situation either. There's plenty of governments who are suddenly like, holy cow, we've got to figure this out. We've always been able to spend fast enough because the interest rates have always been low enough. We've not been in this this specific circumstance.
And we've just not been in an environment where we're earning more than we're paying until now.
Right. So that's why, as I said, it's brand new information. Nikki and I spent about 37 seconds talking about it this morning. I said, let's just brief the finance committee on the fact that this is a real thing. It's not a figment of our imagination, because arbitrage has always been kind of a thing that exists, but nothing that we ever really had to know about. But we'll have more information next month when we
Yeah,
come back.
and it sounds like net, from what you're describing, even if it's quote 100% of the excess, but based on the percentage, as opposed to you missed the 10%, so we're going to charge you 100% of the interest that you earned on all your bonds, not 100% of the bonds. If it's really just on the 10%, that you still come out way ahead. So it's just, you're not as ahead as you had hoped.
Plus, we don't want to, I'd say we don't want, if we're not ready to spend the money, it's never
Yeah.
gonna be a great idea to pull some money out of there to save the
100%. 100%.
Yep.
And because we're talking about large dollars, we wanted to tell you as soon as possible, because to Phil's point, I mean, we knew this was a possibility, but the magnitude was kind of a surprise for us of how large this liability could be. So we wanted to tell you right away.
Okay.
We did ask them, so this was, the initial conversation was this morning, so we've obviously asked them for additional information. We did ask them to give us monthly reporting on this liability. So that is something that we'll be able to pass on to the committee, so that you know where we stand, because as we spend down, that liability number will change. So some of this is projections, and we do have to make sure that they have 100% correct information, but we did want to just talk about it because this is something brand new that we haven't dealt with in a while. The other thing that we wanted to talk about today is for those folks, for most of you, I think all of you have received the investment policy. Some of you were on the committee when we revised it last. As part of our regular processes in the finance department, we review that cash balance sheet that's included in the treasurer's report or in the financial report every month. And we take a look at that from the standpoint of concentration risk. Our investment policy does restrict the percentage of each type of investment that we can invest in. We could have as much as 100% in US Treasuries or in authorized investment pools because of collateralization and FDIC insurance. We do have limits in terms of investment type. So that's kind of the first concentration risk. The second level of concentration risk is that we cannot have more than 50% of our assets in any one single institution. As I know the committee is very familiar, we bank with through Wintrust at North Shore Community Bank. And we've been watching kind of, fortunately, again, both of these are good problems to have, that we're earning a lot of interest and that we have a lot of cash on hand. We've been watching that cash balance kind of creep up, and we're at a point where we are over 50% at North Shore. And we do want to draw that down out of that institution to make sure that we're maintaining compliance with our investment policy, but also to not have more than 50% of our assets in any single institution, which with what we have seen with banks recently. Obviously, we do that for obvious reasons. So what we're recommending is to transfer about 3.5 million out of Wintrust, out of North Shore, to the iPrime account. This is a product that's offered by PMA. This is previously authorized by the Finance Committee and the Village Board as an authorized depository institution. It's essentially a money market, and right now it's been averaging 5.2% interest. It's extremely safe. It's essentially a liquid investment, with the thought process of then splitting out $2 million of that and investing that with our advisors. And that would be invested in treasuries, US agencies, in accordance with our investment policy. Again, this is all, our investment portfolio is designed to preserve principal, not make a lot of money or take on a lot of risk. But our recommendation is to diversify those funds. The other recommendation that we had was that the golf fund, and we've talked about this previously, is holding just over $200,000 at a different investment pool that has been earning less than 1% and in some months has been losing. And in this market, that's crazy. So we want to pull that out and also put that into an account where they can earn that 5%. So still the funds would remain liquid. Because we are fairly confident that the second property tax bills will be coming on time. We know we'll have that influx of cash in September, so that's also, we may have to revisit this again in the fall if that balance keeps creeping up. But this would be just kind of our recommended move within what we have now. We do have an added security blanket in that we do have funds invested with Wintrust. They have a program, some of you might remember, it's called Max Safe, where we're allowed to invest just over $3 million in an investment vehicle that is fully FDIC insured. And they split the FDIC insurance through all of their bank charters. So it's essentially like a fully collateralized
It's
deposit.
like 12 bank charters, and
Right.
$250,000 a piece.
Yes.
You hand them 3 million, right, and they, right.
So we do have that, it's fairly liquid as well, that we can transfer in and out of if we need to, but we are fairly, again, it's a good problem to have, but fairly flush with cash at North Shore, and we wanted to make sure that we are in compliance with the policy.
Hey, Nikki, I have two questions. I can email these to you. Yeah, just to ask them. I guess first is why put the 2 million in the investment portfolio when you can make 5.2% in the money market?
And we could leave that there.
That's what I was wondering.
And then secondly,
Like you said.
what do they make? What is their fee? What is their fee on the money market? What is their fee on the investment portfolio? Like, what is their, do they have some, I'm not accusing anything. But it should at least be transparent as to what they make in terms of their own revenue. It might be the same. But I'd be curious as to why we wouldn't rate 5.2% just even on the money market.
Mhm. And we can do that for now and come back to the committee.
Well, I'm sure they
with
have a
more
reason. I'm
information.
just, you know, it's-
Yeah. Well, and I
Worth
think
hearing.
what we were talking about was diversification of the portfolio to make sure that we're in line with our allocations, which we can go back and make sure that we are. And then also trying to lock in funds at the current bond market, which has been higher than what we've seen in the past. What we had heard from them when they came 2 months ago, and what we heard from them this morning, is that our since inception investment return hasn't been great, because we went to them at a time where interest rates were not wonderful and asked them to invest in bonds, and they weren't earning very much. And now what they're doing is, because it's a 2 to 5 year term portfolio, a lot of those investments are turning over and they're getting into the higher yield bonds and locking those funds in. So that we would have a safe investment for the next 2 to 3.
Take a
2 to
slightly
5
lower
years.
rate, but lock it in for a bit of a longer term, and that's where your expertise, not mine, but I think that's what I'm hearing.
yeah, no, I'm just curious as to their, because most people have good questions. Also, you're assuming the rates are gonna come lower, so the inflation will come lower soon. All these things don't look like they're happening anytime soon.
So what I'm hearing from the committee is maybe you're okay with just transferring it into the money market for now and we can.
Right, but not to, I don't think he's poo-pooing it.
Nope.
It's a-
I just want to understand,
overall,
I just want to
but
understand the rationale.
if you could send some information to the committee as to the details of, about the fees and the rationale, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I want to see the average duration of the portfolio is like 2.3 or something like that. And if, then again, if they're thinking, the rates, you know, are lower in 2.3 years, then if then the bond prices will go up, the bonds we hold, so that would make sense. But I'm just kind of curious as to where they're at.
Although.
It's 5.2 with zero risk is
Yeah.
still 5.2 with zero risk.
The. Right, it's more about the duration of locking it in and what you have to pay to lock it in, essentially, take a little, right? The liquidity that we have is such that it's not like even when we had to buy, you know, invest in stuff that was, it wasn't negative here. It weren't, well, it was Japan that was, you were paying them to hold your money. But it was practically zero for safety, and we didn't have to sell the bonds at a loss because we didn't need that liquidity, but we weren't making anything either. And so now those bonds are coming due, we're getting out of them. So we didn't take a loss on principal. To your point, that was the whole point of buying that investment.
Really, it was, this portfolio was, where can we park funds where we can have guaranteed income that is relatively risk-free, right? That we know we have these reserve funds that we won't dig into that. And we can look at that as a longer-term project of cash balances, of whether or not that fixed reserve that remains invested could go higher. Understanding that we still might need to access those funds as a reserve to emergency funds. So at the time, I think we decided 5 million was safe, but obviously our fund balance is much higher now.
So we won't run into any conflict with putting more of our money with PMAs, but
There's a good question. That one we're okay with because we were, they have two different entities. PMA kind of serves as advisor for iPrime, but they're a separate entity that has a separate board. So they're considered kind of a separate institution. The underlying custody is Harris Bank. And then with PMA, they use a different custodian. I'm trying to think who it is, but definitely a separate entity, even though it's the same advisor.
this 5.2, that's the highest rate we can get in a money market. We know these things.
We haven't looked at that. I think what we were trying to do now from a compliance with our policy is that iPrime is a pre-approved depository by the board. If we do look at money markets, it's something we could look at for sure. If we do look at different depositories, we would bring that before the entire village board to help get your authorization to invest in that. So different or new depositories, we look to the board to let
To
give you
qualify,
permission.
just to like pre-qualify others like
Right.
engineering firms or whatnot.
Exactly. We are
So are they
somewhat,
only pre-qualified?
we have IMET, which is also another local government investment pool. And then we also have the Illinois funds, which is run by the state of Illinois. Yes, we have to keep some funds in there. Because that is the only way that we can get our state shared revenues electronically is if we keep one account or two accounts open there. Otherwise, we have to wait for them to mail us a check. Which would be even slower than they are with electronic deposits. But we are somewhat restricted by state law what type of funds that we can invest in. But that's certainly something that we can look at and evaluate.
Should we think about it on a later date, maybe having a.
Sure, I mean, we haven't reviewed that for a while. We made the choice with PM to go with PMA, so it's been what?
Oh, yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, I think it's been about 5 years. So, yeah, no, certainly we're taking a look to see. There are other potential
Even
choices.
when there's time.
And you know, money market is very secure, but ain't guaranteed. You know, I just want to make sure everybody understands that. Money market can go down. And when, you know, what was it, 2007, the financial crisis hit? Yeah. And that was an issue and the feds were very worried about it. So, you know, as opposed to, oh yeah, my money, you know, my $250,000 or $249,999, whatever the number is, that actually Uncle Sam says for sure, or US Treasuries that you know are 100. There is that difference.
And we could, as part of this continuing this conversation, recirculate the investment policy and see if the committee is still comfortable with where we're at.
And I think too, it makes sense to explain like during the idea, the rules, all the rules for investing in Illinois. Any kind of municipal money are extreme, but not extreme, they're, yeah. The amount of like, we had like, and like before the money moved to the pooled money, you had to hold physical bonds. In your portfolio, you can only have 40% in equities, all these Illinois rules that were really hard, like PMA is kind of a specialist. I think there's maybe one or two that kind of compete with them, but they are kind of a specialist. And I do think, I mean, it's always nice to, you know, you send out a check to see somebody else.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they also get highly terrible. You know, you could be sitting in money markets the whole time. And we would have lost less money in theory, but we've also never seen a bond market. That was the worst bond market in 200 years. So I mean, I think everybody lost.
We do have maximum exposure, so like in a money market fund, the maximum exposure that we could put our assets in is 50% by policy. That's not certainly something that the committee could look at changing. We would have to check state statute too. This is one of those pesky non-home rule
And
things.
they would know that, right?
They would.
Yeah.
They
should.
did, and PMA was, they were part of this policy update to make sure that we are in compliance with Illinois law and what they were comfortable and what they recommended for us as well. But the tricky part is to, if we stray away from PMA, then staff will monitor, staff and the committee will need to monitor that we're in compliance with this too.
And I want to go back to a point that Nikki has made once, twice. This is the right problem to have. And unlike many governmental entities, you know, we're worried about exactly how we are investing and making sure we're protecting principal and yet getting the yield that we can. And not having to give it back to the federal government with regard to the arbitrage issue. But it's because we have money. So
You got the other people did
that's
too,
good.
right? Because even if people had bonds where they couldn't get, you know, 36 months for a fire truck, you got a lot of people
Right.
having this, even beyond,
Right.
they couldn't buy if they wanted to buy.
You're
Right.
you're holding money in a way that you've never had to hold money before because you can't spend it. You can't, you're
Right.
not getting things.
Right.
Your construction projects are slower. Your large capital purchases are slower. Everyone's holding more money than they're used to holding. For a variety of reasons, but yeah, I think that's exactly right on. Yeah. Again, a weird, not altogether
These are,
bad
yes, these are
problem.
both two weird items that we need to have a conversation about this sooner rather than later. So we can certainly send some information to the committee and then plan on a future conversation about this too to revisit. And we'll get more direction on where you'd like to head here, but we will get more information as well on the arbitrage calculations, and then we can start, once we have enough information to make sense of that, we can start giving you monthly report on that of what it's projected to be. With the caveat of that, it will not be finalized until we're 5 years out from issue. Good problem. I keep reiterating to myself too, that this is a good problem to have because it's hard to reframe that, like we have to pay taxes on something is a good thing, but as our investment advisor said this morning, we've earned the maximum amount that we can earn, so that's a good sign if you have to pay taxes. Keep repeating that until it sinks in.
Okay.
And I'm gonna turn it over to Margaret. Take a break.
Good evening. So, your update for the CIP is on page 53 and 54 for the monthly update and page 55 in fact for the quarterly update. So at the board meeting on Thursday, you will see coming before you, the replacement of number 20, the Public Works six-wheel dump truck chassis, in the amount of $209,764. This was not previously scheduled for a specific month of the, year for the purchase, but it was scheduled for calendar year 2024. There'll also be the purchase of 6 electronic speed monitoring signs in the amount of $29,000, and not to exceed amount of $29,000. So this is part of our planned expenditures in the MFT fund for CIP. And just a reminder that $29,000 is just a minor part of our planning that we have for calendar year 2024. There's some other monitoring signs and crosswalk improvements for like a total of $230,000 scheduled for this year. So just one piece of it. The 2027 E1 Cyclone Custom EMAX Pumper Rescue Squad. See if we can remember that, you know, to talk about it later. It was brought before the board by Director Lofgren to talk through the costs that we have to plan for. So that will be coming before the board at a not to exceed amount of $1,408,000. And this CIP purchase, just to remind you, was scheduled for calendar year 2025, but as we've discussed, the order's got to be placed this year because they're not expecting the delivery for approximately 36 months at this point.
Can I ask a question about that? I remember being shocked at the numbers we were talking about at the time. And then I read the 1.4, and so I'd like to know, is that what we think the all-in, or is that what we'll have to write the check when we take delivery and then have to give it to somebody else? Do more custom work, that's a very big number as well to make it ready to go.
Well, there's a couple of ways that I want to answer that question. First is, we think that that is the worst case scenario from the standpoint of the cost to take delivery from the builder.
Mhm.
So there is an 8% escalator built into that number,
Mhm.
just in case.
Got it.
There may be, and I think Sean references this in the cover memo, there may be some costs related to the exchange and removal of some equipment that exists on the
Mhm.
current squad that's
Mhm.
that is going to be transferred
Okay.
into the new one. So I can't say no to your question. We don't know exactly, but our estimation is that that would be a relatively modest
Okay.
cost. We're not talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're probably talking about
Okay,
10 to 20.
okay.
But those
That's the
costs, yeah.
Second part, got it.
Yep.
Thank you for that, appreciate it. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. So just a reminder, so that's not on your schedules because we're talking 2024, it's going to be in 25, and we're anticipating it arriving in 27. And just 2 other quick notes, the bridge maintenance, construction and engineering for Scott and Hazel Avenue is going to come to the board in June instead of May for approval. And then also the water main replacement that we talked about earlier that has to be bid out still for Hofelder and Skokie Ridge, that'll also be coming for the board in June instead of this May meeting. And if you have other questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
General question. It was noted that in our expenditures. The general fund seemed low, well. Due to time capital projects and whatnot, and projects that will be deferred to next year. Other than some of the stuff we already talked about, is there anything else we're intending to defer till next year? That's something discussed. Capital wise. Capital difference.
I don't believe there's any updates, to anything to defer till next year. These were the only changes to the schedule, so it's just the things that we've talked about previous finance committee meetings.
Yeah, vehicles have usually been kind of the problem child, and those seem to be moving along more quickly than they have in at least the past 3 years. we'll check in with James and Monica, relative to any further predictions on some of the larger items, but my last conversation with Monica last week, I don't think there's expected deferrals. There may be some carryover on whether a project is fully finished by the end of the fiscal, but I don't think any specific projects that we don't anticipate undertaking. I will say things like the second floor renovation. We will not spend all that money this year because that project won't kick off till September. So we will carry funds over from year to year, but that's not a deferral.
It's not, it's more carryover than deferment.
Yeah.
If you were to like that much, so maybe change that in the report. Okay, carried over. Thank you. What?
All right, thank you. Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
I had just one last comment. It's looking at the sales tax revenue on 14. It's a lot of red. Certainly feels like repeat from kind of wild COVID spending.
Yeah,
And that's considering a significant cost increase, right? Where everything people are buying in town is 20% higher than it was 3 years ago. And we're still starting to really start to see that come down.
I think the interesting thing when you look at the sales tax is to look at 3 years, because you can in kind of a zigzag fashion. So April of 24, which is January sales, we're at 168. Last year we were at 188. 2 years ago, we were at 249. So, I think we were all kind of looking at those numbers in 2022 and saying, okay, these aren't real. Like, this can't be forever.
People have other things to spend money on there.
Right. And I do think we're seeing some of that leveling off. And some of it, we did push up our projections for sales tax this year, which is to some degree probably where now we're feeling like we're not hitting those projections. I think that's a calibration point in the middle of the year that we also should talk about as to whether or not we adjust those projections further.
That's kind of awesome.
Yeah, yeah. And we have a brand new restaurant that's still getting its feet under it. I was happy to hear Honey Butter Fried Chicken had their best day on Mother's Day. Since they've been in town. They have noted an uptick in business since their outdoor spaces have opened. Some of it is kind of just getting the squeaky wheels to turn, and hopefully, we're starting to see that that particular business start to establish itself in the community. And we have a unique business district. All of our business districts are unique in their scale, right? But Nikki and I have talked. This is an area that we're going to pay particularly close attention to. We're getting updated sales tax numbers from the state that we can analyze and contemplate. And that's something that I think next month we will be now, with 5 months under our belts, perhaps having different conversations about what that number should project out at the end of the year.
Even if we can get 3 months, we can get
Yeah.
the first quarter.
Yeah, right.
That would give us a little bit better handle.
Yeah, it's slow.
Yeah.
It's slow.
You shouldn't surprise anyone in this room, but the way we get sales tax data is sending a request to the Department of Revenue, and then someone at the Department of Revenue has to manually run the report and put it on a portal for us. So there's no way for us to just kind of go into a database and run a
Can't look at it
report.
yourself.
And the data itself is significantly lagged because of from the time the sales happen to the time that the business files, to the time that DOR processes it and then distributes it to us. There's almost 4 months there, so.
Yeah.
It's hard to be reactionary, or like, it's hard not to be reactionary when you're
Yeah.
getting the data so late.
Yeah.
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 All right. With that, there are no other. And may I have a motion to adjourn? All those in favor? Aye. We are adjourned, and thank you.